Enough. Growing Pains. Tales from the Crib and Beyond by Kevin Ramos. Acknowledgements to all my mothers. Dedication. Some wounds don't heal, but the scars they leave behind can be beautiful and funny. As read by the author. Don't tell the babysitter Mom's dead. I don't know where my mother is buried. It's such a hard thing to admit, but there you go. I guess I hate the way it makes me sound. Like I'm either a cold, heartless asshat, or like I'm the kind of person who always misplaces the keys to the car. Either way, it doesn't make for the most congenial conversational companion, or the most reliable designated driver. On the day of her funeral, we drove towards the cemetery, which was the intermittent stop in the long procession of her illness towards death. I remember dexterously slipping into the limo, then stumbling out. There was an over-the-top dramatic moment of me standing over her grave, kissing a rose and tossing it into a hole in the ground meant for her coffin. It will give the moment an operatic flair. Or so I thought, like something out of the telenovelas she loved watching. Other than those bright, shiny examples of recollection, amnesia has wiped my memory clean. Like any rational person who's good at handling pressure, I had started to drink early that day. 10 a.m. early. Okay, let me stop here. I should set the scene more explicitly. Right now, I'm giving you the outline of a pretty good monologue, but since you're reading this, or listening to it, and don't have the benefit of watching me perform it, punctuated with my impeccable comedic timing, you might need a little help not to click delete and then scream out loud, "You cold, heartless asshat." To say I wasn't myself at the time of my mother's funeral would be an understatement, tantamount to Donald Trump can't possibly win the presidency in 2016. You see, I had been living in the hospital with Mother Darling, as I enjoyed calling her, for the last 2 weeks. I had been sleeping about 3 hours a day, working full-time, taking care of an ailing parent, and nursing a blossoming drinking problem that would define the latter part of my life. With even a modicum of self-awareness, or even a morsel of experiential knowledge at the time, I think I could have warned myself, "My dear, you are on the verge of an epic Mariah Carey-style nervous breakdown." You would think, with my mother and mine's complex history, that I would have no issue in letting her face this final challenge on her own. That was problematic for me. Although I agree she had it coming, I just couldn't do that. She raised me too well in certain areas. I didn't want to be a bully. I didn't want to kick her while she was so down. Also, I really despise I am this empathetic person. I felt like so many others had let her down throughout her lifetime. I couldn't be one more person on that list. You see, of all the things my mother had done to me, some of which might be unforgivable, I know for a fact she encountered them as well. Mother, may we sleep with danger? Mother Darling had this pathological fear of hospitals, to the point when informed interment was necessary for what was to be the last 2 weeks of her life, she broke down in unmother darling-like vulnerable tears. I had never seen her weep to that point, not at weddings or funerals. She didn't even cry when I was 9 and presented her with a personalized poem for her birthday. Roses are red, violets are blue, Mother Darling is lovely, and so am I. Granted the rhyme was off, but still. Her mule was an unmistakable and quite literal cry for help. Being her dutiful and moronic son, I said, "Well, maybe I could stay with you." On afterthought, I am sure one should include that sentence in a leather-bound copy of the stupidest things ever said. I'm still kind of shocked I entertained the idea, and I think I finally understand why she accepted such a ridiculous offer. You see, I was no more prepared for the finality and arduousness of death than she was. Drowning people often take down those who would save them, Our lives together when I was a child had so little stability and regimen. In the hospital, on her way out of this life, in a destructive manner, it gave us a chance to correct that misfortune. Repeat. Until insane. Mornings. She would have her blood drawn, vitals taken, ending with a check-in with her rather cute doctor. The only perk of living with her in the hospital was Dr. Goranowitz on those early days. Dr. Grandorable as I knew him, with his pale blue eyes half hidden behind circular glasses, had a sweet professorial aura about him. The effortless compassion in his sweet face matched his gentle demeanor. He was tender and concerned. I watched his interactions with my mother, noticing how he carefully adjusted her frail body from side to side to examine her. It made me want to be her, in a way. At the time, the only way I could see a man like him wanting to touch me was with the benefit of a debilitating illness. Growing up with men who, on occasion, were generously described as piggish assholes, he was a welcome change for an inexperienced and romance-challenged 26-year-old. Afternoons, more tests, more blood work. I would come back from my job, a literary agent's assistant in the city. The bus from New York into New Jersey at that time of day would take about a half hour. 1 minute, I would sit in my office in Manhattan, listening to an actor complain about not getting a part in this new musical about singing people living with AIDS on the east side of Manhattan. This turned out to be Rent. Who knew? Next, I would be back in New Jersey, watching my mother fade away in a not-so-unfamiliar manner. To a point, I felt like my life was an awful musical about some off-color subject matter. Lonely, abused boy forced to take care of his vampirish mother on her deathbed. Of course it would be scored by Andrew Lloyd Webber. Evenings, even more tests, final blood work, and then the day succumbed into the night. My mother would go to sleep and I would start to drink. I sipped some wine from a thermos, but when that proved insufficient, I had backup pints of vodka and Southern Comfort. This went on for a bit. The days bled together. The only way I could tell time was passing was because of her deterioration. Before she died, our farewell was a simple exchange of "I love yous" in the morning. Simple in action, complicated in the delivery, as neither of us was used to saying it. In all the time I had known her, I can only remember 2 instances of us telling each other "I love you." Once, when I cried because a little cat I had died, and now that she was dying. You love to hurt me. So why don't I know where she now resides, buried deep in the earth? I suppose I can say it's an awkward thing to bring up at the Thanksgiving Day table. So, does anyone remember where we left Mom's body? Oh, and can someone pass the peas? What would everyone think of me? There it is, in a nutshell. My concern is about what someone will think about me. Obviously, if it mattered to me where my mother was buried, I would have found out. But God forbid anyone should think I wasn't perfect, and that maybe I was even a little relieved she was gone. God, that sounds horrible. One night on the bus from Manhattan, I was so tired. My body felt like all the nerves connecting the tissue were twitching. The feeling, a dread that would permeate my every waking moment since she went into the hospital, had a physical weight to it. I can't go, I thought to myself. The hospital, her presence felt like a punishment to me that night. I wanted to sleep in my own bed, drink freely, not worry, be a regular gay dude, whatever that is. The chair next to her IV stand where I slept was hard and inflexible, like her. Watching her life ebb away was the only way I could pass the time. The hospital didn't have cable. I thought, for a moment, just a moment, how good it would feel when she finally died. I could sleep where I wanted. I didn't need to worry every time I came home that I would find her on the floor, dead. She would already be gone. You can't get deader. I knew that wasn't right. I regretted it immediately. But something deep inside told me until she died, I would never really live. Since the age of 6, I had been my mother's caretaker. Okay, let's be honest here. I was more like an indentured servant at best. At worst, I was her tormented Disney princess. My sweetest memory of childhood revolves around being knocked unconscious by a laundry bag she threw out of a third-story window. At least it was something I could look back on and laugh at. It wasn't her being intentionally cruel. Not really. In her defense, she actually thought she was helping me. She didn't want me to climb 3 stories to pick up all the clothes. But there was so much more. Other memories whose lingerings have become almost afflictive. The beatings bother me at present. They were the most gratuitous examples of unsportsmanlike behavior. I mean, in the sense that I was an object of ridicule and aggression already for being the fat gay kid on the block. It didn't help that my mother was in a safe harbor away from that. In some ways, she was my greatest opponent. I think it's still haunting me because it was so unnecessary. I don't think I'm self-serving or even the slightest bit hyperbolic when I say I was perfect. Thinking about it now, I would love to have a weird little chubby kid like me hanging around the house. I gave the joint atmosphere. Weapons of choice. What did I do? Was the most uttered sentence in my adolescence. Weapon of choice, an extension cord freshly ripped out from behind an old wooden encased television that hummed when turned on. Yes, I'm totally dating myself here. Purpose, you ask of me? Why, to whip a child bloody with. First of all, there is a difficulty involved in this action. I'm surprised she could come out of her stupor long enough to follow through with it. Televisions in the 80s were not small objects by any stretch of the term. It took time and precision to remove the cord from the back of the hulking mound of technology. I'm not going to even get into the fact that basically you'd be without programming while the beating happened. So there was some sacrifice involved on her part. I don't get it. Still don't, never will. The rips on my skin from the pressure of the cord, the beatings, or whatever you want to think of them as, were always followed by the eerily painful stings the gashes left. I can still see Sister Anne's judgmental eyes. They are forever burned in my mind. She had looked at the blood-stained markings on my shirt, where the bruises were still healing. She seemed to yell in her angry nun voice, "Who did that to you?" Bruises do heal. Sometimes. But then there were games, too. Mother had called them games, and I thought they were odd at the time. But now they're different, sad, almost psychotic.
How much do you love me? Tell me or I will jump.
She would edge her body out of the third-story window. I can't forget that look on her face. There was a cheeriness in her disposition, a childish carelessness, a delighted psychopathy. To this day, it terrifies me. As a child, I didn't realize this was her warped way of seeking affirmation of love. She wanted to know how much she meant to me. I just thought my mother would jump out of a window if I didn't stop her. Frantic, I would run and tug at her waist, begging her not to leave me. And she wouldn't. Not then. I would be so nervous afterward, I would sit in a corner and cry till the fear subsided. But it left an aftertaste for me, a shell-shockedness. For many years I equated love with pain. If it didn't hurt, it couldn't be love. The call is coming from inside the house. Hangovers are the occupational hazard of the drug addict. But did you know they can also affect one's ability to keep an occupation? I entered the workforce just about as soon as I realized my mother needed a helper, a keeper, and a facilitator. Mother Darling worked at a doctor's office. Talk about a kid in a candy store. While there, she forged her prescriptions for charming little drugs with no severe side effects like Ativan, Halcium, and, of course, Valium. I have included some reactions of the drugs below for reference and just plain old fun. Paranoia, suicidal ideation, impaired judgment, death. Irony lovers will note she needed to keep the job to get the drugs, but she couldn't get to work for the drugs. I pulled myself out of school to fill in for her on her off days when her inability to function specialized tasks like reading and writing was too great to surmount. These days grew more numerous as the years passed. In my junior year of high school, I missed 45 days. I would call the nuns. Yes, I attended Catholic school for about 6 years, which gave me the added measure of self-hate that I was not missing in my formative years. On the call, a full-blown theatrical drama would unfold. I got a coffee and donut, sat at the breakfast table, and took my time to really inhabit the character beforehand. Teenager with a crazy-as-hell drugged-out mother. Lights, camera, action, go! I'd phone into the office. The school receptionist would answer. She knew my voice immediately.
Hi, Kevin.
She'd squawk.
Why are we not coming in today?
I knew she knew why. She knew I knew. I knew she knew that I knew, but even so, I had to pretend. I can cough, sneeze, and cry on cue. Really, it's true. My go-to diseases were sinusitis, strep throat, influenza, and diarrhea. I only used that one when I had to call out twice in 1 week. Death in the family was always helpful, and that's when the ability to weep without prompting came in really handy. At the time, I took those telephonic teleplays as rehearsals for my future career as an actor. But now, I see they were more in-depth training for my future endeavors as a liar. At the office, I mimicked what my mother would do, filling out the papers for patients, setting up the examination rooms, answering the phones. In broken English, I'm a method actor. And most important, I pretended I wasn't covering for an addict. So far, these shenanigans are par for the course for children of addicts, or even just a garden variety of sloppy parents. I'm not pretending there was anything about this that would put me on a child abuse top 10 list with Christina Crawford and Mackenzie Phillips. That's not the point, really. I have made peace with the idea that my sense of protection and stability, forever shattered as a child by not feeling like there was ever an adult ever in the room, will never rebuild. Shaming, judgment, and peace. Made peace is a strong word. Let's just say I don't think it was soul-destroying. But what I found the most damaging was how she accentuated and preyed upon my insecurities. Shaming is a part of life, I'm told. It usually has more to do with the shamer than the shamed. Judgment is the system we live in, so they say. It usually has more to do with the judger than the judged. Constant shaming and judgment is a pain in the TWAT, and that usually only fucks over the shamed and the judged. At 15 years old, I weighed about 350 pounds. Now, this was before being obese was all the rage in society. I was doing it before it became cool. They say weight in metaphysical thought to be the way the soul seeks to protect itself from the outside world, a blanket over fear, and I was nothing but afraid. From the ages of 6 to 16, my life was a nightmare both at home and at school, and it all started when I woke up. At home, my mother, increasingly overcome by her disease, became ever more erratic, angry, aggressive, and simultaneously neglectful. She would scream and yell at my inability to stop eating, but would insist I make dinner every night, the food she loved, greasy, fatty Puerto Rican-style cuisine. By the way, I'm a fantastic cook with a vast arsenal of foods, high-calorie and healthy. She hated the way I looked and thought it reflected poorly on her, but didn't seem to understand, or care, what it made me feel like to be the child of an addict. At school, people often taunted and bullied me, pretty much what every different child goes through, but I didn't have someone to tell me it was wrong. I thought of it as just the way things were, and always would be. It wasn't like I was being treated any differently at home. My mother, the kids at school, the world at large taught me to hate my body. Religion coached me to hate my soul. I'm not sure how someone comes out of that alive. And yet I did. I attribute it to the divine. Some say it's just dumb luck. Divine has a better ring to it for me, though. Die already. At 19, I attempted suicide. I can't believe this never occurred to me before. It's a perfect way out for someone looking for an easy way out, and that is so me. The entirety of the prior year, I had been on a binging and purging diet, so I had lost about 150 pounds. And according to popular opinion, I looked better than ever. My mother even expressed approval in my appearance. Sort of. The saggy skin bothered her, but it was better than fat. For an entire year, I would binge in the morning on white rice and hamburger meat, doused with ketchup. The breakfast of champions. Then off I would gallop to the bathroom to throw it all up into the porcelain vomitorium, the toilet. Neighbors and family wondered how I was losing so much weight. I wasn't sure what bulimia was at the time, but I knew enough to hide it. So I invented a plot point about me going on that Richard Simmons diet where you pay for food with cards. Well, that was utter bullshit. I did buy the cards, though, and the workout tape. I rather enjoyed the exercise routine. I practiced it every morning before school. Sweating to the oldies was my jam, as the kids said back then. In all honesty, I loved seeing a gay man who was so unapologetically himself. He, with his shorty shorts and ultra perm, gave me hope one day. I, too, could be so reckless and free. Be careful what you wish for. My hunger never really went away, but I found a way to quell it. During the day, I would suppress my appetite by drinking vodka. I was up to about a bottle a day. Things were looking up, mostly. Besides the eating disorder and destructive parental relationship, I thought. I had graduated high school second in my class, kind of shocking considering how little I went to school. Then was accepted to college. I would be the first person in my family to attend. And I had a marvelous new insight, a revelation, if you will. It turns out fitting into a size 32 pant waist doesn't mean jack shit if you don't have any self-worth. Who knew? I was still unloved and unhappy, and I had no prospect or hope those two facts would ever change. So, without giving it much thought that morning, I marched into the kitchen, charged towards the cabinet where my mother kept all her goodies, and I rifled through the brown bottles and downed everything I could find. So distraught and frantic were my fondlings, I think I might have taken a few antibiotics while I was at it. Once I had drained the bottles, I cleaned up after myself, took a quick shower, combed my hair, got into my brand new skinny clothes, and lay in my mother's bed. I had really hoped she would find me dead in her bed. Knowing how superstitious she was, I was sure this would cause her at least 1 or 2 sleepless nights. You screwed my life, and now I will give you under-eye bags. It sounded fair to me. I recall being quite excited. There were some tantalizing possibilities ahead of me. No more pain. No more violence. No more expectations. I felt relieved. I didn't even fear hell, which is saying a lot for a person who attended a Catholic school for as long as I had. In bed, I heard my stomach make a noise. I hadn't eaten at all, well, except for the pills. Not even a crumb to throw up afterward. Gosh, you're gonna kill yourself and still stay on a diet? That just sounds crazy. Ever the fat kid, I went to the kitchen. I opened the freezer, as that was where my mother kept all her pastries, cookies, and other confections. She loved them cold, chilled to perfection. I know how to piss her off, I played with the words in my head. I will eat her favorites. That simplistic hour of deathly gobbling ended an entire year of binging and purging. On a roll, I decided to save the very best for last, though. I inhaled 2 sourly frozen pound cakes. I even chased them down with hunks of government-brand American cheese, which I used to call imperial fromage. A perfect Last Supper. The next thing I remember was waking up in a hospital. I couldn't see. Deliriously, I got up and asked a security guard if I could stay in the room with him. You know what he said? If you said no, you guessed right. I dragged myself back to my room and collapsed on the bed. I was on suicide watch for 2 days. That was hard. Since I hadn't died, I wanted to turn on my Sweat into the Oldies tape and work off some of that gorgeous food. Once on the lips, forever on the hips. When I left the hospital, a doctor commented that I was a fortunate young man. I can't prove this, and I'm sure it's not a medically sound theory, but I think Sarah Lee saved my life that night. Gertrude Stein. I resented my mother for a long time after. Still do. Servitude, neglect, physical abuse, psychological torture are all hard things to get past even for a nice boy like me. And yet, in a total case of Stockholm Syndrome, I felt lost when she died. Lost for a reason for living. Please, let me explain. I had substantial issues with that woman. I confess even now, I am secretly glad I'm rid of her. Well, I guess it's not much of a secret anymore. But as she would always tell me,
You only get one mother in this world.
Thank God was my only reply. When she died, I was 26 going on 13. I was a virgin who had never had a boyfriend. Still haven't. Not really. Worked at a job I hated and gave up on every dream I ever envisioned. Her death was an excuse to give up on my life. If I came from such messed up stock, how could there ever be any hope for me? I mean, she was a druggie who ruined every relationship she ever entered, whether it be with men, women, or children. And I was just like her. Grand visions for my future swirled around in my head. I'm not sure where they came from, being that my reality was not conducive to anything as ephemeral as a dream. I had wanted to be a writer. I had desired to be an acclaimed actor in demand. I had yearned to be an expatriate who lived in Paris, like Gertrude Stein. Famous, loved, and in demand. I would only come back to the United States to sign contracts with Simon & Schuster and Warner Brothers Pictures. This was before DocuSign, mind you. Mother, may I? When she died, I was 26 going on 13. I had seen my mother die the excruciating, slow, painful death of an addict. Her thin frame was so delicate, touching her casually would cause a bruise. Her belly extended to 3 or 4 times its size, making her look like an old pregnant woman. In her eyes, the stare was that of old death, like a carcass moving and talking, devoid of a soul. When she died, I was 26 going on 13. I was ready to embark on my road to addiction. Truly. Not surprising, as some might say I was trying to join her. I mean, if you subscribe to the belief that substance abuse is just another form of suicide, albeit a prolonged one. Why don't I know where my mother is buried? At the time, if I knew where they buried her body, it would have confirmed for me she was not only merely dead, but really, most sincerely dead. I would have hastened to join her in a way quicker than the lackadaisical death of an alcoholic. When I think of my mother, I always imagine her reading some parenting guide called something like, "So you want to raise a perfect happy child." After about a good careful pursuit of the pages, she would close the binder, toss the book over her shoulder, and say, "Fuck that." It was hard to comprehend what she did to me as a child. After all, she was my mother. But as a fellow addict to another sufferer, I can forgive. A little. Most children raised by addicts know the difficulty in said relationship and live with the burning questions, never answered. Why do I love her? Did she love me? Why me? My foray with addiction, which dwarfed my mother's like Michelangelo exhibiting right next to that elephant with the paintbrush, has made this time in my life one for reflection and gratitude. Hard things to come by when you have so much anger built up inside, but they are so essential. So when I get a case of suicidal ideations, I love the name of that reaction to my mom's drugs. I try to concentrate, really hard sometimes, on all the gifts she gave me, begrudgingly. Words are not weapons. Mother darling, without knowing, gave me my love of the written word. Quite the writer herself, she didn't write prose or poetry. Instead, she wrote grievances in long-form letters. She would leave little gems in strategic places around the house where she was sure I would find them. A message taped to the toilet seat, one held in place on the refrigerator door by Smurf magnets. Or, sometimes, when the mood took her, she'd tie those heartfelt crafted words to a rock and gently slam them through the windshield of my car. I learned how to avoid these little messages by carefully lifting the bowl lid, eating out, and taking the bus to work. I've selected a few opening sentences to demonstrate her natural, authorial flair.
Are you there, God? It's me, Gloria. My son is an asshole.
I think she borrowed a little from Judy Blume on this one, but I gave her points for personalization.
By the time you read this, I will most certainly be dead by my own hands.
This was my first exposure to the concept of gripping the reader with your first sentence. Effective? Hell yes. Also, the effortless suspense created was downright Daphne du Maurier-ish, and no, she seldom took her life on those fateful nights. Now, my favorite was,
Children, my hope and God's enduring torment to me.
Notice the mix of dark surrealism and general overall meanness. Yes, that woman had a way with words. But, like with everything, there was another side. There were the Christmas cards. I look forward to them every year. They could be a shining light during the holidays, and they were at their best when we were broke. They needed fashioning out of typewriter paper and ballpoint pen. Mother embroidered them with delicate, drawn flying birds and happy sunflowers facing the sun. She'd simply punctuate the priceless page with her most exceptional example of literary panache.
Merry Xmas, son.
Stylistic choice. Self-love starts from the outside in, or so Mother Darling thought, and every morning she captivated me. I watched her with bated breath as she prepared her pre-work ritual, getting into drag, transforming herself into the image she held in her mind. It felt like I was sitting at an altar with a great deity worshipping itself. A lack of money never kept her from her pursuit of personal style, not as long as the house had fashionable printed bedspreads she could turn into couture suits, a la Scarlett O'Hara. Not that she knew of such a person. My mom only knew one famous white person, Jamie Lee Curtis.
I love the way she acts,
she used to say, which I could only assume was a side effect of the potent hallucinatory cocktail of prescription drugs she was taking. Her couturier abilities didn't go unnoticed and led to the creation of the family idiom that said, "One who leaves Gloria alone with a duvet cover is one who will soon be without a duvet cover." Vocal gymnastics. For most, singing is a sign of happiness. My mother sang because she was miserable and wanted to emphasize the point in musical harmony. Her fondness of a song about two star-crossed lovers, one who boards an airplane that's fated to fall into the ocean, while the other can only look on and wave goodbye, mouthing, "I love you," bordered on obsessive. I once asked my mother how it was possible to see and wave at someone on a 747 Boeing being pulled into the center of the ocean. Sadly, she never answered this and never stopped singing her illogical water ballad, which, as a sidebar, I think was a predecessor to Celine Dion's Titanic theme. Now, I know these tortured love songs were her version of a lullaby, and now that I know this, I find them oddly comforting. Every once in a while, I'll find myself humming that tune. It sends a little shiver up my spine, but a comforting one. Now, I know I'm grasping at straws here. Most of this stuff doesn't amount to a hill of shit. I know, but it's all I got left. I didn't have the mother who helped me with my homework or woke me up early for breakfast. In fact, I did that for her. She never gave me advice about boys or love. How could she? She had no freaking clue about men or the concept of love. So why do I love my mother? I love her for the same reasons I love myself today. I love her need to be heard, to write of her soul, of her life. I love the peacock nature of her style, and her demand for attention. I loved her voice of an angel, a caustic, manipulative angel, but an angel nonetheless. So now when I picture my mother all these years later, after all that has happened, I see her on a 747 Boeing, being pulled into the center of the ocean, and me on the shore mouthing, "I love you." And did she love me? It doesn't matter. I loved her. And that is more than enough. About the author. Kevin Ramos studied theater at Mason Gross School of the Arts and the University of Washington. He is a writer, actor, and bon vivant. He makes his home now in San Antonio, Texas, but has lived all over the country, spreading joy and grievances. Like Mom.